Hello everybody, and welcome to another puzzle challenge video with ChessUniversity.com. This is Ryan Murphy again, and we've moved on to the weekend puzzles, so we're in the advanced category in terms of difficulty. And for this particular puzzle, it's white to play and win. White has a very good position already, the knight on e5 being very strong, but black has a good counterplay with this active rook at the moment, so it's not exactly trivial for white to convert this into a win. This game comes to us from a Chess.com Blitz game, played between players Chin and Grinstein. And in the game, I can tell you that white played the move knight to c4, and the game eventually was decided in white's favor, though with precise play here, black is supposed to be fine. And black did find the move rook c2, which is very nice to dislodge the knight, or at least to try to dislodge the knight, after which there's some loose pawn on b2, and if the pawn moves up to b3, then the pawn on a2 is hanging, so black gets counterplay along the second, as you would expect. So going back, in this moment, instead of knight c4, white has another move, which is completely winning. Not exactly the flashy stuff you might come to expect from tactics puzzles, but it's very direct, it's quite forcing, and it's also very instructive in terms of how to play with rooks in the endgame. So hopefully you guys will spot that. I will put the link in the YouTube description for where you guys can post your answers before the solution goes up if you want reward points on ChessUniversity.com. So check that out if you're on YouTube. If you're already on ChessUniversity.com, well done. That's awesome, and hopefully you guys got the right answer. But as usual, I'm going to take a step back and see how we got to this position. Alright, so this one began e4, c5, c3, Alapin Sicilian, trying to go d4, d6, d4, takes, knight f6. This is not one of the really most theoretical ways to face this opening for anyone interested in like a very, very quick, I guess, overview of how this should be thought about. When your opponent plays the move c3 in the opening, they're depriving their knight of the c3 square, which in turn takes away protection from the pawn on e4. So it's usually very logical in this position, because that extra defense of e4 is not available, to immediately hit this pawn. There's two logical moves that do that in d5, which is one branch of theory, and knight f6, which is another one, and those are both pretty good moves for black. Anything else allows white to take the center and get the two pawns in the middle, which is supposed to be very good for white, freeing their position and just giving them a command of a lot of space. So d6 is sort of a more passive move, just trying to get the pieces out, but it allows white to get what they want. And after these pretty typical opening moves, both sides just developing the minor pieces. White already has a very nice position. h3 is not strictly necessary, but white probably wants to go knight f3 without even having to think about bishop g4. And they can technically afford it in this position because white has such good control over the center that there's really nothing immediately going on that can harm white, but still it's probably better to just develop. Anyway, castle, queen to d2, knight d7, bishop h6. This is probably a bit premature. It's more prudent to just continue developing. It is the opening phase, so moves like bishop d3, knight f3 should be considered before bishop h6, breaking that principle of moving the same piece twice in the opening. Okay, here black played b6, trying to get the bishop to the long diagonal on b7. It's also a little bit counterintuitive, but possible to play the move bishop h6, which usually you would almost never want to do, to invite the queen into this very annoying square where it looks at your king as black. But there's nothing to help this queen. There's no, knight g5 and deflection of this knight and checkmate on h7. So there's actually nothing to fear, and the main reason it's interesting to do this in this particular position is of this move queen to a5 with intention of pinning the knight and trying to immediately undermine the center. It's very anti-positional to allow the queen here, but if you have some nice tactical ideas to follow it up, it can be worth looking at. Anyway, b6 takes, knight f3, bishop b7. Black's getting their stuff out. All their pieces are pretty good now, except for maybe the knight on d7. e5 played, castles, queen c7. Kind of awkward to put the queen on the open file, because after rook c1, the queen's going to be very uncomfortable here, which is exactly what happens. Both sides put a rook on the c file, and white jumps into d5 right away, which doesn't actually do anything tactically, so it was probably better to keep this move in reserve and just bring the other rook into the game, either rook e1 or rook d1. Also, another interesting idea here might be to play with a4, a5 at some point, not right away, but a4 could be interesting to start with. Anyway, after rook ac1, rook ac8, knight d5 played, but if this is only going to turn into a trade of knights, that's actually going to favor black, because like I mentioned earlier, this knight's actually kind of unhappy. It doesn't have much to do, and if it ends up replacing the other knight on f6, then it's at least putting pressure on e4. So this is kind of just like a fancy move that, if reacted to properly, doesn't do very much. And as forecasted, the knights get swapped. Queen e3, protecting the pawn on e4. Yeah, I don't think black should be taking here because it allows white to get either the queen on this diagonal, which makes a pin, or the knight on d4, which could start hopping around and putting pressure. So in general, yeah, you want to keep tension in positions like this instead of being the first person to trade, because you help improve your opponent's pieces when they recapture on that square. That's what happens here. Trade, trade. Again, not really sure if taking is correct because you're helping develop a rook on f1 that wasn't doing anything, putting it on an open file. So I think white should be happy with the last few moves. Queen e7, putting pressure on the e-pawn. Rook e1 back. Rook e8. And black's just all in on attacking this pawn. Here white defends it with knight d2. Queen e5, going for a queen swap. That's actually a pretty good move. If the queens are traded on e5, which is indeed what happens, and pawn takes, which is also correct, now we have a structure change where this bishop is a bit blocked in, this bishop's the one exerting pressure, this pawn's hard to attack. So in general, white has the long-term better bishop and should be slightly more happy. So white goes f3, putting more pawns on light squares. Not usually good when you have a light square bishop, but I guess they didn't want to have to think about defending the pawn anymore with all the pieces. Black starts hopping the knight in. That's a very good move, bishop b5, pinning this knight. And now knight c4, another very good move. And now the threat is simply to remove the defender and then go after this pawn. And in this position, black actually kind of pushes white to make the sequence of moves, which clearly will win material for white. So this was a mistake, a6. Now white gets to execute what they were going to do anyway, even if they weren't pushed into doing it. So takes, takes, and knight takes e5, rook d2. I mean, in a position like this, you kind of have to keep active. This is generally what we're taught. If you're down material, you want your rook to be as active as possible. Your opponent's second rank is usually the best place for the rook. But unfortunately, there's a tactical problem. So in this case, the move rook e7 or rook c7 would have been preferred, defending black's 7th rank, which turns out to be slightly vulnerable. Okay, but in any case, this is where we started. So we've gotten to our key position, and so again, it's white to play and win. So let me know what you guys think, and hopefully you'll solve it, and I'll see everybody tomorrow. Thanks.